All right. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about some interactive activities that you can use for formative assessments. I'm going to focus only on two different websites that you can use, two different activities that you can use, and those two are going to be Kahoot and Jeopardy Labs. Kahoot is, most people are familiar with, it's a website where you can create quiz-like games that have multiple choice answers, or you can do true and false questions, those kind of things. Those accounts tend to be free for educators, but there are ways you can upgrade your account by, paying a monthly fee and whatnot. The other one is Jeopardy Labs. This is one that I have used in the past in my classrooms. It is a Jeopardy style type game, which means it has the board, it has the point values, and as well as being able to select them. It's very similar to what you would see in a PowerPoint version, except it's web-based so that you don't have to figure out where the slides need to go so that you can return back to the game board and remove the point values for each one. So it's very intuitive for teachers to use. The whole site is free. You can create and use any of the ones that other people have created for free. However, if you want to be able to log in and edit your Jeopardy games or any of those things, you could pay a $20 membership fee that is for your entire lifetime. So you'll never have to worry about paying them ever again. They have plenty of templates that you can use, and it's very similar to PowerPoint. So it's really easy to create the questions. And so we're going to start with those two things. Why do we want to use these things? Again, we're trying to make sure that our students are very well engaged, especially when it comes to things like formative assessments. We want the students to do their best and want to be engaged so that they can perform and we can get a good level, and that'll help drive a lot of the instruction that we do. Both Jeopardy Labs and Kahoot are extremely engaging. If you've used Kahoot in your class, you know the kids absolutely love playing it. They get so excited about getting the right answers, being the #1 spot, all those things. Jeopardy Labs is very similar in that as well. You have a Jeopardy game that if you've done it through PowerPoint, you'll know that it's really competitive among the students. They like getting the answers right. They like seeing the points go up, or other students getting answers wrong and showing that they have their points go down. So both of these games are really dynamic. You can use them in really different ways. Kahoot, for example, you can do in small groups together with 2 to 3 students, or you can do it independently. Each student, if you have the ability to do one-to-one devices, that will really be good for getting an idea of what each individual student knows. Jeopardy Labs can do that too. However, the point system can get kind of crazy, and it's better for students working in smaller groups. Both of them are easy to use with Zoom. Jeopardy Labs tends to be a little bit easier to use with Zoom just because you don't have to switch between the two apps like you would if you had Kahoot, because Kahoot has to use a web browser or its own dedicated app to switch back and forth between the two. So you might lose some of the kids' cameras in Zoom for Kahoot, whereas in Jeopardy Labs, they can type answers, for example, in the chat. So how do you use these? In Jeopardy Labs, it's just jeopardylabs.com. You can find and create the games on their website. It's very easy to see the browsing function. You can search for things that every other user who has ever created a Jeopardy Labs game is available there for free. And so you can play them online, and every game also allows you to download it so that you can save it onto your computer and you can use those games later without having to go back and search for them again. Points can be awarded for correct answers. Points can also be subtracted for incorrect answers. However, You don't have to do that. If you don't want to subtract points, you can always just make it so that they don't lose any points at all. Kahoot as very similar. It can be used online only. It does not have an offline function. So if you lose internet during a Kahoot game, then everybody kind of is off Kahoot. And there's not much you can do about that. It just is the way it is. Points are also awarded for correct answers for Kahoot. However, more points are awarded for students who answer more quickly. So the longer it takes for you to process the answer, the lower your points are for getting the correct answer. So it kind of encourages being able to know the answer, but also know or be able to recall it quickly, or calculate things if you're doing math, for example, quickly to get the most amount of points so that the totals in the end find a winner. So how can you use these in classroom or on Zoom? Both are able to be used on smart boards because you can project the game board on the smart board, and the students can be interacting either on their own device, or they can be doing things with whiteboards or their own piece of paper. And so it's easy for you to keep track of who's doing what, and they can all be engaged at the same time. Both can be used either in small groups and whole group. Now that sounds kind of silly for you to think that maybe you can do these in small groups, but Jeopardy Labs can be, you can give them the students a link and they can do it in small group, and one student could be the host and the other students could be writing their answers down and earning points. And that can be something that they can do self-directed. They don't have to be in front of the teacher to do that. Kahoot also can do that. They can have the assign function where you can create a Kahoot and then give them the game code, and they can do it on their own. So they can go through the entire process of the Kahoot on their own, and they can compete against other players, but it's asynchronous. It's not all at the same time. So if you want to do a Kahoot and assign it to, for example, a small group for them to do in a center while you work with your teacher group, either e-learning or on campus, they can go and do that and go through the Kahoot and see who gets the most correct answers and the highest answers. Both can be played on Zoom. Jeopardy Labs, you can use the chime in function by raising your hand or doing one of the emotes on the screen, or they can just type their answer in chat, and you can pick the one that got the first one or the first three, maybe even the first five. Kahoot as itself, like I said, you can do the game board on your shared screen, but the students would have to switch to a different browser in order to answer the question. Especially on an iPad, that can be a little bit difficult just because once they switch screens, they lose what the question is. They can't see it, and some of the iPads, you actually lose their camera and you can't see what they're doing. So it can be a little bit more challenging for the Kahoot, but the kids really love the colors and the timer really running down and the excitement of trying to do all those things. Some of the limitations of Jeopardy Labs and Kahoot. Jeopardy Labs is not really designed to collect individual student data. It is more of a check for understanding. You can do it individually and in small groups and get individual data that way, but as a whole group formative, you would actually use it more as a group understanding, or pose them a question and circulate around the room and listen to their discussion on answering a question. Whereas Kahoot can be a more data collection tool. It actually creates reports for you at the end of a game where you can see what each user got correct, what each user got wrong, and you can use that data to drive your instruction more precisely with the students than you could with Jeopardy Labs. Jeopardy Labs has all games that are user created. None of them are created by organizations. There is no question bank. So some of the questions are not always going to meet the intent of our standards. They may not be as rigorous as we would like them to be. So unless you create the game yourself, you may have some extreme variation in how rigorous the questions are and how useful they can be. And Jeopardy Labs is only limited to 25 questions because that's a 5x5 square, and that's the biggest you can do with a free version. Kahoot has its limits too. In the free version, you're only allowed to use multiple choice or true and false. So if you want to put multiple answers on a multiple choice, multiple select question on your Kahoot, you have to put multiple answers in one of the choices that you picked. And data collection only works really well if the students work independently. And that also goes, again, with Jeopardy Labs as well. You only get information on those students if they work independently, unless what you're looking for is a check for understanding and the student's discussion. And then those things will actually work really well with both sets of programs. You can circulate if you're in the classroom and really understand what's going on. If you have breakout rooms, you can listen to the students' discussion and figure out what they're doing with those. All right, so I don't want to just talk through a PowerPoint. So here is a couple of the two sites. We have Jeopardy Labs here, and it's jeopardylabs.com. And you can see that it gives you the option to build, browse, and then log in and join. And they actually have an example here for you to play with. So when you go to build one, it'll automatically ask you to make a password, and just remember the password so that when you edit it, you can come back to it later. In here, it brings up the board where you can click on each one of these questions and create the question and answer. You can create the categories, enter a title. You can even delete some of these rows if you don't want 5, if you only want 3, make it smaller, shorter. Instead of a 20-minute game, you can shorten it to 2 categories and make it like a 5-10-minute game. When you're finished, you save and finish it, and it gives you the link to that, and it gives you the option to download. Now, I've already downloaded a couple of these, but let's do 5th grade math. So if you look, you got some really interesting ones here. And every time you start up one of these Jeopardy Labs, it starts with this screen right here, which allows you to pick how many teams you want to score. You don't have to pick any teams at all. So if you're just going to do it as a review with no points involved, you can select no teams and you can start it. I like to use this download function here because then you can save the game for offline use, and because then you can play it whenever you want without having to come back and searching for that game again. So for example, if it's 2 years from now and you say, hey, I want to do that Jeopardy game for, FSA math review, you can go find it in your resources than having to go back to Jeopardy Labs and finding it all over again after multiple things have changed. One thing I will recommend that you do every time you download one is to use this print function, which will print the questions and answers for those so that you will have the questions and the answers in front of you whenever you're playing this game. So you don't have to go, well, what was the answer to that? Or do some weird calculations in your head or on a piece of paper as the kids are playing it at the same time. You'll already have all the questions and answers for you.
Santos.
Yes, ma'am.
You said with this one, there's already pre-made ones, right? That's what
right.
you were trying to. And then we can share the screen and let the kids control it, where they can just select the box, and then they won't lose sight of us like in Kahoot.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
They can control the screen. If you're sharing the screen and you do a screen share and you have them control, they can select where they want to go. Just be careful that they don't accidentally show the answer, because up here in the corner, you can reveal the answer. So you want to make sure that you take back control once they've picked what their question is. So that's very interactive in that direction. And once the kids answer the question and you reveal the answer, when you go back to the board, it automatically grays out that question again. So it's gone off the board.
Okay,
If
good.
you want to come back to it and review it or talk about it, you can click it and go back to it. So it's never actually completely gone, but it does gray out for that. I've downloaded a couple of these, and like I said, it is very simple. It's very, very similar. The only difference is instead of getting those options when you download it, you don't get the options for the printing or any of the other things that go with it. You just get the teams. But other than that, it plays exactly the same. You'll notice that everything else is exactly the same. Nothing changes differently. It's just coming from your computer instead of online. And so those are all very useful and very, very powerful, especially if you don't know what kind of questions to put in there. You can always go and look for some that are pre-made and get an idea of where you want them to go. Same thing with Kahoot, except Kahoot is a little bit better about having less user created. They actually have a Discover tab when you log in where you can see all of the things that have been created by Kahoot itself and some other organizations as well. They have their top picks based on what's going on. You can use the search function to find the ones that you want as well. I have always created my own because I find that, like with the Jeopardy labs, they are not always looking for exactly the same thing we want to teach our kids, and we want to make sure that those questions are aligned to the standards we're teaching and the data we're trying to collect. Especially if you're using it for formative assessment, you want to make sure that you're collecting the data that's going to drive your instruction for what you're looking for. So in one of the Kahoots that I've done, I actually created a Kahoot and it's specifically for standards. And so when I created this Kahoot, it was designed to be for MAFS 5 G11 and 23, which are geometry standards for shapes and classifying shapes and such. Now, the fun thing about Kahoot is you don't have to be with the students to play Kahoot. They can play it on their own. Like I said, if you click the assign button here, and that allows you to give them the room code and they can do it on their own. It can be its own assignment, and so the students can do it independently. You can take a grade on it, although I will caution e-learning teachers to be very careful about doing that because they still have access to the internet, and so it might be easy for them to look for the answers if you're not specifically watching them play the game. But the Teach version lets you do that for online in front of you. So you're in control of the game, you advance the slides, you tell them when you're going to the next question, and that has more control for you. Either way, every game has a report at the end of the game, which allows you to see how the students did for that play session. And so every session you play that game, it will generate a report and you can see those live results. So if I did this one as a test, so you guys could see it without having any of the other student names from my previous classes. But when you go to the players tab here in the reports, you can see your report for each individual student. Gives you the question, what they answered, whether they got it correct, how long it took them to answer the question. So those kind of pieces of information can be used for a lot of formative assessment data, and you can drive your instruction, especially if you know question 1 was specifically for G1.1, and question 3 and question 5 were, and they got all those correct, but question 2 and question 4 were a different standard and they got those wrong. So now you have an idea of what you need to review with that individual student. And so those kind of things are very useful for a teacher to really drive instruction. And that is all I have to share. So what I'm going to do is go to the chat now because I see we have a couple of questions. Can we share the games with other teachers? Yes, you absolutely can share the games with other teachers. If you, for example, Jeopardy Labs, if you copy the URL and send it to a teacher, they can access it. If you download the game, you can email it to them. or put it on a flash drive. So it's very easy to do that. Kahoot has a function where it allows you to share those with other teachers as well. And I believe your Kahoots can be made public so people can search for them also. So there's a way to share them. And if you go to the Kahoots, there's a 3 dots tab, and it tells you one of the options is edit, duplicate, rename, and the other one is share. And you can get the code to share that with other teachers. Can you tell me more about playing Kahoot? How is it played? For example, what does a teacher do and what do students do? Okay, let me show you what it looks like. And I'll turn the sound on for this one. So here's that share function I was discussing. If you want to play, you can play, and I'm going to do practice because it's a single player game. This would be similar to what the teachers would do. I own this Kahoot. They would put in the game code and it would come up with this screen. And you would enter your nickname. The students would enter their nickname, and then the game would start. And this one's picking a bunch of random bots to play with so that you have somebody to compete against. And then the game starts. And the students will see this board. If this were in your classroom, this would be projected on the board. If you're having them do it on their own, it would be individually on their device. So this one is just a picture with the question. The question is there, and they have to pick the correct answer. This timer will run down. If the student doesn't answer within the time limit, you get 0 points because you got the answer wrong. If you pick a wrong answer, you get 0 points. If you pick a right answer, you get more points for those the correct answer. So I got this one, it's the correct answer. I got 854 points because I answered within a certain amount of time. So it ticks down from 1,000 to nothing. So by the time the timer runs out, it's 0.
Mr. Sansom,
and you play through that the whole time. Yes, ma'am.
So they need 2 devices in order to play, right?
Not
because
exactly.
How are they going to switch back? Read the question and then switch back?
Well, if they're being assigned, if it's being assigned and it's a 1-player game like what I just showed you here, this one is on the student screen only. It's not on the teacher screen. If you are doing the teach one where you play and it's teach, you are projecting the answers, but they don't see the questions. Or you're projecting questions, but they don't see the questions. All they see is the 4 choices. So you would have to have them be able to see your screen to get the question.
Okay.
And Ms. Ruiz, what would you recommend would be better for lower grades? For students and in lower grades, I think Kahoot would be better just because it's very visually appealing, and so it appeals to the students. And you can make the questions, you can use pictures very easily, and those visuals will be very helpful for the students in understanding what they're doing.
Is the timer set for you, or can you set the timer yourself?
You can set the timer yourself. Let me close this.
The only problem or that setback would be the iPad function
Yes.
that you were talking about earlier for the lower grades, because then they can't
Yes.
see your camera.
That's correct. If you're playing this in, if the students are playing this, they have to be in the web browser to do this. And because of that, they can't be on Zoom at the same time. So they would have to switch back and forth to see the question and to answer if you were doing it in a teacher-led format.
So there is another option to do a similar game style, and that's through Nearpod using Time to Climb. And then you don't have to share your screen. You can just assign it to your students and have them log into Nearpod, but you would have to generate those because most of the Time to Climb games aren't as good quality. So you'd have to create your own questions, but you could, in essence, do the same game on a Nearpod.
Yes, you can do the same thing on Nearpod. You can also do the same, you can do something similar in Schoology as well. The thing is, like he said, some of those are not as engaging as Kahoot, but because Kahoot it's got sound, it's got the colors, it's the timer kind of pushes people to answer questions, and it tries to drive the quick recall of that information. So these are just two tools. I'm not saying don't use Schoology. I'm not saying you can't use Nearpod. I'm just offering two more tools for your toolbox for you to use for those kind of engaging formative assessments. These again, I want to say these are not good for summative assessments. You would definitely not want to have these as your end all be all for checking student understanding. This would be very good for getting information, but not completely for grading. You can use Kahoots for grades, but you want to be careful that it's only individually and it's as limited as you can, because again, the timer does change some things, and you definitely don't want to alter your data just because a student didn't answer as quickly as you would like, or they rushed and then picked an answer without thinking because they wanted to get the most points possible. So those are some considerations that you might want to think about when you're using these. But again, I highly recommend them for formative and checks for understanding, because they really are engaging and students really love doing them. They used to argue with me over again about doing Jeopardy as often as possible because they love to compete with each other. So any other questions about these two tools for you to use? No? Well, thank you guys for being a part of this session and being my recording guinea pigs.